You misunderstood. I mean, Hitler, Dan, was as much a Catholic as you are a Christian.
Exactly. He was a horrible Catholic.
No. He was as much a Catholic as you are a Christian. You started a Christian and you left. Hitler was a moral monster who hated the church and realized the Catholic Church was one of his principal opponents.
That's an entirely different debate about which you are entirely wrong, but that would have to be an entire evening. But go ahead with your question. What is your question?
Would you believe that we're talking about the reality of the Spirit and the consequence of believing in God and goodness? You misunderstood me. I didn't say that we theists are as good as you atheists. I said our record is enormously better. And you weren't able to produce any local evidence.
Is that your question?
And my question is this: do you seriously suggest that the production of a Shakespearean sonnet, Beethoven symphony, the elaboration of the principle of relativity, you could go on, is similar to human digestive processes, as you mentioned in passing, in your reduction to absurdity of the reality of the Spirit?
Yes, it's the same idea, but to a greater degree. In kind, it is the exact same thing. Neurons are firing, emotions are felt, physical processes are happening within a physical brain, which produces what we would call the functioning mind. And if that brain disappears, the mind disappears. So, of course, digestion is much simpler than thought, but they're both functions of a biological organism. And the brain, of course, is an amazingly much more complex organism. So its functions are going to be much more complex as well.
Thank Cardinal Pell for his questions, and it's now Dan's turn again to cross-examine.
It in fact might be true that the atheist view of the cosmos is bleak. But truth is not determined by how bleak something is. I mean, if reality is reality and we don't like what we see, are we going to stick our head in the Christian sand and pretend like it's better than it really is? It takes true courage to face a death with no afterlife. It takes true courage to find meaning in the world. My question to you now, if it's true, as you suggest, that the functional complexity of life requires an intelligent designer, why does not the functional complexity of the mind of that designer also require a similar designer?
Precisely as I set out in my first 10 minutes, precisely because God is not a creature like you and I. The whole God hypothesis is that God is something beyond nature, that he's a necessary being. He contains God spiritually. He's not a he or a she. God contains in himself, that's an anthropomorphic way of speaking, the reason for his existence and the source of all goodness and truth and beauty. And rather than continually claiming that God is not like the bloke next door, I think you have to grapple with the proposition that is put in about the reality of God.
Well, then, following from that, aren't you admitting to us that your initial premise, that functional complexity requires a designer, is a false premise? Because if there exists beyond nature, I don't know how that happens, and maybe you can define for us what you mean by the word beyond, something that is functionally complex, that doesn't need a designer, then why do we, who are functionally complex within the unit, why do we need it as well? Don't you see the circular reasoning of your argument? Why is your initial premise then valid if your conclusion contradicts your initial premise?
Whatever else that might be said about my argumentation, it's not circular, because I'm not arguing to someone like myself. I do concede that people can say, we're confronted by all the beauties of nature, all the goodness of the world. We have discovered many of the mathematical processes that keep nature moving. But I don't know where it comes from. I chicken out. I can understand that. But to say there is no explanation for it, which is what an atheist is doing, I think is contrary to reason, is quite unreasonable.
Now that we know through science and biology that many other species, dolphins, whales, elephants, chimpanzees, dogs, have altruistic, compassionate, empathetic feelings and behaviors, now that we know that we humans are not unique in that regard, that we are perhaps to a greater degree more empathetic, but now that we see our place within the animal kingdom, and we see that dogs apologize, we see that whales will sacrifice for each other, we see chimpanzees caring and giving and sacrificing. Now that we see that, how can you claim that there's anything special about the functionings of human empathy and compassion? Aren't we all just biological organisms?
We certainly are biological organisms, and undoubtedly the higher animal organisms have come closer to us. But we have one gift that they don't. We have the gift of language, which presupposes thought. So I remember once being asked by a biologist, how do you know the dinosaurs weren't intelligent? And I said, well, I don't think they produced anything, and also they had very small brains. And he said, yes, but there's another thing, and the development of that was an equal miracle to the development of life. He says, they don't have a voice box. And because you need a voice box so that you can articulate your thoughts and explain them and develop them. So no, a dog can grunt and bark and they can show rudimentary sympathy, but I list the great achievements of civilization. No animal has come within a bull's roar of that.
Thank you, Dan, for your questions. It's now Cardinal Pell's turn to take cross-examination again.
Did you ask some questions?
Yes.
Good. I believe in truth and goodness and beauty. And I would like to know from your bleak but courageous viewpoint how you explain truth and goodness and beauty.
Well, I don't believe in any of those things, but I accept them as a part of the human experience. Belief is what you use when you don't have knowledge. If the only way you can accept an assertion is by faith, you're admitting that assertion cannot be accepted on its own merit. So I don't believe in those things. Truth, in my understanding, is simply the degree with which a statement corresponds with reality. You make a statement, and if that statement corresponds, we will give it a label of truth. And most truth, of course, is probabilistic, or to a certain degree. Did Homer actually exist? Who wrote the plays of Homer? Maybe, maybe not. We give it a certain degree of confidence. That's all the truth is. Truth is not a thing with a capital T hanging around in the universe. It's the way we measure our propositions and our statements. Goodness is... that was a three-part question, and I only got to answer one part of it.
Cardinal can choose to let you answer it all.
Yeah,
Well,
yes. Go on.
Well, goodness also is a label, morality and ethics are a label for how we intend to live in a world with less violence, less harm. So if a mother is hugging and providing for her child, we say that mother is good, right? A mother who is burning a child with a cigarette butt, we say, ooh, that's not a good mother. We measure in physical ways. Goodness is measured in physical, material ways. Goodness is not some ethereal thing that hangs out there. Goodness is a label for those actions and feelings of ours that have the intention of minimizing harm, real harm in the real world. It's much more than that, but there is a perfectly good naturalistic explanation for goodness.